In this video, we will be discussing Chapter 3 of your textbook, Productivity, Innovation, and Strategy. But before we begin, I would strongly suggest reading over Chapter 3 before watching this video. There's also some recommended MyLab MIS homework for this chapter, the warm-up quiz and the video quiz. You can find that on the MyLab MIS website under Assignments, then Homework. So let's jump right into things by first discussing what productivity is. Let's start by taking a look at the textbook definition of labor productivity, which states that labor productivity is the gross domestic product, or GDP, of a country divided by the total paid hours worked by all people in that country. Now that's a lot of words, and unfortunately our text doesn't go into too much detail about what GDP actually is. So let's first explore that. Now you likely have heard the term GDP many times, on the news or in articles, but what exactly is GDP? Well, GDP measures the value of economic activity within a country. It is the sum of the market value of all goods and services produced in an economy, so in this case Canada, during a period of time. So for example, it would measure the total cost of goods we've produced and the total cost of service we have sold in a year, a month, or any finite time frame. So let's jump in by taking a look at some real numbers. Here we can see Canada's monthly GDP from January 2017 to January 2022. You might notice a bit of a dip here in the middle, and I'm sure you can guess why that was. This is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and our slow road back to normal after lockdowns were lifted. We can see just before the pandemic, we had a GDP of just over $2 billion, and only recently recovered about 2 years later. I say recovered, but the truth is that even though we are back to pre-pandemic levels, there's still a permanent loss here compared to where we would have been should the pandemic have never happened. Another common metric we should mention is the gross national product, or the GNP for short. This is similar to the GDP, but it includes not only the total value of goods and services produced in a country, but also by any residents of that country living outside its borders, or running businesses outside its borders. So, for example, for Canada, the GDP would only include goods and services produced in our borders, while the GNP would also include goods and services produced by permanent Canadian residents that happen to be living abroad, such as in the United States or the United Kingdom. It also includes any activities by Canadian-owned businesses outside of our borders. So with all of that in mind, let's take a look again at labor productivity. What this is saying is that the labor productivity is the GDP of a country, that is the value of all goods and services, divided by the total number of hours worked by all people that are working in that country. For Canada, in April 2022, this came out to about $63 per person, while the United States was at about around $83 per person, Norway $98, and Germany $79. These numbers come from the Conference Board Total Economy database, and are a bit more up to date than what your textbook has. What this number means is that each working person in Canada produced, on average, $63 per hour towards the economy, or rather, that they produce $63 worth of goods or services per hour. This is an important figure. It's the primary indicator of our per capita income and is considered to be the best measure of Canada's growth, according to the Conference Board of Canada. This is a bit of a problem, though. As you can see from this table, Canada is lagging behind in labor productivity when compared to other similar countries. Now, the solution to this productivity gap is not simply working harder or spending more hours at work. Rather, the solution is working smarter or more efficiently. For Canada, this means fostering a culture of innovation, opening its industries to more competition, and increasing the amount of machinery and equipment, particularly in the information and communication sector. That's also called the ICT sector. Surely this means that throwing more money and resources at information technology, or IT rather, means more productivity, right? After all, we had just talked about the computer room from the 40s in a previous lecture, and this was actually a room full of humans, or human computers, doing manual calculations, as opposed to what we'd consider today as computers. Surely investing more in IT would increase productivity, like replacing these people with a single computer. Well, this is not what we happen to see in real life. And this was famously studied and predicted by Stephen Roach in the late 80s and can be summed up with a quote from a famous Nobel Prize-winning economist, Robert Solow. And that quote is, "We see computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics." We call this discrepancy the productivity paradox. There is still, however, some debate over these findings. Some claim that this productivity paradox is just a result of measurement error. However, we currently don't know what the real cause is. Regardless of IT's impact on productivity, it is still clear that there is some business value in investing in IT. After all, if you ignore technology, you'll quickly find your competitive advantage slipping away as the world moves on without you. There are three primary ways IT can create value for your business. These are through productivity, structure of competition, and benefits to the end consumer. Productivity describes how IT enables companies to make more outputs from the same inputs. This essentially means it allows a company to do more with less. For example, if our company makes rubber ducks using a 3D printer, investing more into IT, such as automating more of the ordering and printing process, would save our employees time and allow them to work more efficiently, creating more ducks in the same amount of time, or alternatively, maybe a better printer would waste less filament and allow us to make more ducks while using less resources. It can also allow for better and faster outputs. For example, if we invested in higher quality 3D printers, we could print ducks at a higher resolution and give a better end product to our customers. We could also invest in more 3D printers and print more ducks faster. Next is structure of competition. It changes how companies compete with each other and gain competitive advantages. Think back to the case of Blockbuster and Netflix we discussed in our first lecture. Netflix invested heavily into IT to create a rent-by-mail DVD service, and then to create a streaming service. At the same time, Blockbuster was overly conservative and chose to keep renting from physical locations. By the time Blockbuster realized their mistake, it was too late and they went under. The home movie industry changed permanently due to technology, and Blockbuster lost their competitive advantage because they did not see the value in this new technology. In this case, we can say that technology altered the structure of competition. Next is benefits to the end consumer. IT helps make processes more efficient and changes the nature of competition. These changes might get passed on to the consumer, either in terms of receiving better quality goods or services for the same price, or passing that cost saving onto the customer by lowering the price of goods. For example, in the days of Blockbuster, $10 might have only gotten you a movie or two to rent for a weekend, and you'd be responsible for returning it or face late fees. Now, for around $10 a month, Netflix gives you access to thousands of movies for as long as you pay the monthly fee and without having to leave your home. So not only did Netflix investment in IT help them with their competition with Blockbuster, it also passed benefits on to the end consumer. One last important note on this topic. While I have been explaining how investments in IT can create value, this always has to be done with a clear idea of the value that technology will create. Simply upgrading your IT infrastructure for the sake of staying up to date, or purchasing the latest technological fad without any clear goal in mind, will simply not work and will leave your company in a worse place. Understanding the value of IT requires knowledge of both information technology and business, as well as a clear plan to position your investment in IT to gain optimal value from it. In short, technology for technology's sake just doesn't work. There has to be some sort of business goal or objective that guides it. Now let's move on to specifically looking at how information systems improve productivity. Productivity can be increased by increasing efficiencies or by increasing the efficiencies of processes. By increasing efficiency, we mean accomplishing business processes either more quickly, with fewer resources, or ideally, both. Essentially doing more with less. We can see this as doing things right, or doing things we are already doing better, faster, or with less resources. By increasing effectiveness, we mean taking a step back and considering if we are doing the right things. Is our current product line what our customers want? Is there a better use of my time? Is this the most effective way to use employees? These are all examples of asking if we are doing the right things. And this is critical because we can make a product right, that is, as efficiently as possible, but that will still be pointless if our customers are not willing to buy it. Being able to make thousands of rubber ducks a day will not help us if no one wants to buy a rubber duck. In Chapter 2, we talked a bit about business processes, and a closely related concept to that is that of the value chain. Value chains are networks of value-creating activities. This simply means some action or activity your company does that adds value to raw materials or products. For example, turning 3D printer filament into toy ducks adds value to what was just raw filament, and you can now turn around and sell that same plastic for more. This can also simply be activities like shipping raw materials from your supplier to your warehouse, or shipping finished products to your customers or a retail outlet. Moving materials adds value, as they are now where you need them to be. After all, 3D printer filament would be useless to us if it was stored in some warehouse we could not access. Value chains are made up of at least one business process, but in most cases, they involve many complex and interconnected business processes. Let's take a look at an example to get a better idea of this. Let's say you run a local chocolate-making business here in London, Ontario, just like our local Annie's Chocolates. You take raw materials like baking chocolate or cocoa powder and turn them into a wide range of chocolate products and sell them from your own storefront. Let's take a look at what steps and business processes are required for that chocolate to be created and eventually sold to you at a store, and how value is added at each step along the way. The process of making chocolate starts with harvesting cacao beans from cacao trees that grow in equatorial forests, commonly in South America and Southern Africa. Local farmers harvest cacao pods, remove the cacao beans, and dry them on large racks. Even at this first step, we can see how some value is being added. Cacao beans are far more valuable to a business dried and removed from a pod than left on the trees. Next, farmers take the beans to a local processing facility that inspects them, processes them, and packages them for sale. Again, value is added as the beans are now in a state ready to be sold and shipped to business customers. But there's still some more steps needed before they can be used to create our chocolate. The next step is for the beans to be shipped to a business that transforms the dried beans into raw bars of baking chocolate. For the sake of this example, we'll say that this factory is somewhere in Canada. Value is added in shipping the beans, as they are not useful to the Canadian chocolate factory if they are still located in South America. The chocolate factory manufactures the baking chocolate, cocoa powder, and cocoa butter from the dried cacao beans. Again, clear value is added. After all, you are likely to pay money for baking chocolate or cocoa powder, but probably would not consider buying just some dried cacao beans. Finally, the baking chocolate, cocoa powder, and cocoa butter are shipped from the factory to your store. You transform these raw ingredients into new products like chocolate-covered pretzels, chocolate bunnies, truffles, and so on. Once again, the value is added as your customers will pay far more for handmade chocolate treats than simply a bar of baking chocolate. We can see that in each step of the chain, value is added until it reaches the end customer. We start with cacao pod and a tree that had little value and ended up with handcrafted chocolates that customers will pay a premium for. Another thing we should discuss is that value chains have direction. When going from raw materials towards a finished product, we could say that we are going downstream in the value chain. We are going from a finished product towards raw materials, we could say that we are going upstream in the value chain. When a business expands its operations to start conducting activities downstream in the value chain, we say that they are undertaking backwards integration, or moving upstream. For example, if our chocolate company decided to start creating its own chocolate from dried cacao beans, we would say that we are undergoing backwards integration, or we are moving upstream in the value chain. On the other hand, if a company expands its activities to include one from downstream in the value chain, such as the cacao bean processing facility starting to make baking chocolate, we would say that they are undergoing forwards integration, or moving downstream in the value chain. This forwards and backwards integration can be extremely valuable for a business, as the more value you add to a product, the higher you can charge for the final product, and you get a larger margin between the price you pay for raw materials and the price you sell your product for. Next, we should talk about the types of activities in a value chain. The activities we saw in that last example were all examples of primary activities. These are activities which directly add value to products, like turning the cacao beans into cocoa powder or shipping them overseas. They accumulate costs and add value to products. This can include activities such as receiving and storing inventory, manufacturing a product, shipping out a product, marketing and sales, or even providing a customer with direct product support. But there are also supporting activities. These are activities that do not add value directly to the product, but do incur some cost. Instead, these supporting activities support the primary activities in some way. They do add value overall, but this value is often much harder to calculate or directly tie to an individual product. Examples would include things like human resources, procurement, maintenance on equipment, accounting, or even IT. Supporting activities are often a problem area for business as they tend to get ignored or undervalued as managers may only see the cost they bring and not the overall value. However, things like accounting, human resources, and IT departments are critical for modern companies to run, and ignoring them can lead to disaster. Take, for example, a company that sees they have a large IT cost and figure the IT department does not add much value. After all, the computers seem to be working fine, and this is a manufacturing company, not Google. So they downsize the IT department to just the bare minimum and outsource where they can. Things go fine for a few months, and massive savings are had, at least until one Friday night when a hard drive fails on a main inventory management system server and no one is left to fix it on short notice on the weekend. To make matters worse, the backups have stopped being done as the employee responsible for maintaining them was laid off. Now you have a disaster on your hands, and all manufacturing and shipping is stopped until you can get someone in on Monday to fix it and pray that the data can be restored. The opposite can also be true as well. In some cases, companies ignore the cost of supporting activities and do not bother trying to improve their efficiency. This quickly allows costs to get out of control. The key here is that both types of activities need to be considered, and both need to be seen as both value and cost centers. So let's do a quick activity to help us understand these types of activities. Here I have a few different types of activities listed. Try to sort them into primary and secondary activities. I'll put up a timer, but once again, feel free to pause the video if you feel like you need more time. And we're back. Let's take a look at the solution. Now, some of these might be a bit confusing at first. Sales and marketing are primary activities. They add value to products directly by convincing your customer they need or want the product and enabling you to sell it for a higher price. Similarly, customer support adds values directly to the supported products. Customers might be willing to pay more or be more likely to purchase your product over competitors if they know that you have a good support system for your products. For example, Amazon's very lenient return policy allowed them to convince customers to adopt online shopping when it was still a newer concept in the early 90s. A note here about IT. For most businesses, this is a supporting activity. However, if the product you sell is software or an online service, IT could also be part of your primary activities, depending on how your business is structured. Let's move on now to organizational strategy and explore how the strategy your business employs must be closely tied to your industry structure. When talking about organizational strategy and industry structure, it is essential to discuss the work of Michael Porter. Porter's competitive strategies and five forces model are instrumental in business strategy development and are mentioned in almost all of the modern business textbooks today. Porter's five forces model allows us to assess an industry's structure and analyze the competitive forces that might be at play. This is critical for us to determine the profitability of running a business in a particular industry. The first force Porter defines is the bargaining power of customers. Your customers vote with their dollar, and you need them to vote for you over your rivals. When assessing your place in an industry, you need to look at how much your customers need a product, how useful they think it is, and why do they want it. Perhaps most importantly, why are they going to buy it from you over your competitors? If there are many competitors or choices in this space, customers will be able to demand lower costs and higher quality goods. You need to consider if you can meet these demands and still make a profit. The next force is threat of substitutions. And what Porter meant by this is that you do not have to only worry about direct competitors in your field, but also about products or services being created in other fields that might offer substitutions or alternatives to your own. For example, if you're a laptop manufacturer, you have to worry about not only other laptop manufacturers, but also manufacturers of other devices like tablets, smartphones, and hybrids that might supplant your own product. Another example might be found in the soft drink industry. Pepsi's main competitor is Coca-Cola. However, this is not the only competition they need to be worried about. If, for example, customers started to wanting healthier options, Pepsi could be at risk of substitution from things like bottled water or even vitamin water. Next is the bargaining power of suppliers. For manufacturing businesses, you need a supplier of raw materials that are of high quality and a reasonable price. If there's only one such supplier that meets your business's needs, and they know this, they'll have significant leverage over your business and will be able to demand a higher price. If you're making laptops and one component is only made by one chip company, you could be at significant risk if that chip company decides to raise prices, is unable to meet your business demands, or is bought out by a new company that won't sell to you anymore. You have to be positioned correctly to manage this risk, such as always having a backup supplier lined up for each component in your product. It's important to be proactive and not reactive in this regard. Otherwise, you could be facing manufacturing downtime and shortages while you frantically search for a new supplier. The threat of new entrants describes the risk of a new business moving into the industry. The way to protect against this is by putting up roadblocks to prevent new entrants. This could be through legal means like patents and copyright, but it could also be through strategy, such as locking in customers to your product or having a significant competitive advantage in terms of your technology infrastructure, such that could be extremely costly for new entrants to reproduce your work. The last force is rivalry among existing firms. This is similar to threat of new entrants, except these are competitors that already exist in the industry. All of your rivals will be looking at the same forces present in your industry and will be constantly trying to gain a competitive advantage over you and the others in your industry. This is why we cannot allow our business to remain stagnant, because if we do, we'll be quickly replaced by a company that is actively investing in new products, features, and optimizing their business process. It is the intensity of each of these five forces that determine the characteristics of an industry and ultimately how profitable and sustainable our business will be in this space. Fortunately for us, Porter also developed 4 generic strategies for dealing with these forces in a given industry. These strategies are classified based on the scope of the market they apply to. By scope, we mean the part of the industry that your business is targeting, a niche segment, or the industry as a whole. For example, we could take a look at the electronics industry. A company like Sony has a broad market scope. They sell TVs, laptops, digital cameras, speakers, and even video game consoles like the PlayStation 5. Meanwhile, Nintendo targets a very focused market niche, just video game consoles and just video game software for their consoles, such as the Nintendo Switch. Even within the video game industry, Nintendo targets a particularly niche group of young gamers with an emphasis on local multiplayer games as opposed to online gaming. These strategies are also categorized by the type of competitive advantage they bring. A low-cost advantage would be positioning your company such that you are offering customers a lower price than your rivals. A differentiation strategy implies that you add some value to your product that differentiates it from your competitors. To go back to the video game example, Sony and Microsoft offer a fairly standard line of video game consoles that display games on a TV. They compete heavily with each other in terms of cost and hardware features of their products. Nintendo, on the other hand, takes a differentiation approach, offering a hybrid console that can instantly transition from being a TV-based console into a handheld system. This difference means that Nintendo does not have to compete on hardware specs, as their customers see more value in this new portability. Putting these together, breadth of market scope and type of competitive advantage, gives us 4 competitive strategies. Cost leadership involves having the lowest priced products across the whole industry. For example, TLC is a Chinese electronics company that focuses on cost leadership across the industry, producing things like smart TVs, phones, and other home electronics and appliances. This means that they aim to sell their products for less than their competitors across the whole industry and all of their product lines. Differentiation involves adding some kind of value to your products or services that go beyond simply being cheap and doing this for your whole industry. For example, Sony is a home electronics manufacturer, but they aim to provide higher quality goods rather than a reduced price, and sell them directly to customers based on their brand's perceived quality. They follow this strategy across multiple product lines and the whole home electronics industry. Differentiation focus is similar to just differentiation, except it targets a niche market instead of a whole industry. We already talked about Nintendo. Rather than having a broad scope like Microsoft or Sony, Nintendo targets a niche market, only video games and consoles, and even within that market, only certain types of games. They don't produce other home electronics. Furthermore, even within this niche, they focus on differentiation through things like introducing motion controls, or now more recently, portability with their Nintendo Switch. Lastly is cost focus. Again, this is similar to cost leadership, but only targeted at a niche market or a single product, and not a whole industry. One example of this can be found in the niche market of energy drinks. This is a niche market when compared to the soft drink industry as a whole. In this case, Monster took a cost-focused strategy, selling their products for significantly less per liter than their rival at the time, Red Bull. It's important to keep in mind that this is only specific to the energy drink market in this case. Both products would be far more costly if compared to soft drinks outside this market, like Pepsi and Coke, in the industry as a whole. This is why this is an example of cost focus and not cost leadership. Key thing to keep in mind with these strategies is that a business's goals, objectives, culture, and activities all must be in alignment and consistent with their competitive strategy. Simply picking a competitive strategy at random from this table will not help your company. Picking a cost strategy simply will not work if you're unable to produce your products more cheaply than your competitors. One last thing to discuss about these strategies is that there is some legitimate criticisms of this model. Porter claimed that a company could only be successful in implementing one strategy at a time, and trying to focus on more than one strategy at a time would ultimately hurt a business by dividing their efforts. However, current research and real-world cases show that this is not always true, and in fact, hybrid strategies can be even more effective. One real-world example would yet again be Nintendo. Nintendo not only implements a differentiation focus, but also a cost-focused strategy, selling the cheapest video game console of the big three. Implementing both strategies has been incredibly successful for Nintendo. Despite having their hardware with lower specifications and less focus on online gaming, Nintendo is still consistently selling a similar number of consoles to Xbox and PlayStation, but with a higher margin on their hardware. Let's now look at information technology and its relationship to innovation. Changes to industries often happen due to technological innovations. Yet once again, recall the impact Netflix had on the home movie industry, or Amazon on retail. When discussing technological innovations, we often refer to new technologies as being disruptive or sustaining. This is a concept that was first put forth by Professors Bauer and Christensen in 1995. Sustaining technologies are ones that maintain the rate of improvement in customer value. For example, if the technology we are talking about are smartphones, innovations like improving the camera quality, upgrading the CPU to make the phone faster, reworking the GUI to be more usable, making the phone smaller and lighter, and so on, are all sustaining technologies, as they are adding value to an existing technology and making it more sustainable over a longer period of time. That is to say, these improvements make smartphones more competitive and prevent customers from substituting them with newer alternatives like tablets or smartwatches. Disruptive technologies add new attributes or features to accepted mainstream products. These are innovations that disrupt the industry or even create a new one by making the old technology obsolete or no longer appealing to customers. A good example of this is in how we listen to music, and how it's changed over the years. In the 80s, the main way to listen to music on the go was Walkmans, which played cassette tapes. These were quickly replaced by CD players in the 90s, which offered more songs and higher quality music. By the late 90s and early 2000s, this industry was disrupted yet again by the MP3 player. These now offered customers a way of buying music without even leaving their home by purchasing and downloading individual MP3 files. Then the MP3 player was in turn made irrelevant by smartphones. This is also a great example of a threat of substitution, where an innovation from a different market area disrupted a seemingly unrelated area. And now in modern times, we are seeing streaming music services such as Spotify and Amazon Music changing things once again. But this time, the disruption is more in how we buy music than the player. Streaming services have moved us away from a pay-per-song model to a pay-per-month model for unlimited songs, as opposed to buying individual MP3s. Another great example of a disruptive technology was the digital camera. These eliminated both the need for film and the need for photo development services. This in particular was devastating to Kodak, a company that specialized in analog photography, including analog cameras, film, and photo development services. So once again, the key here is that companies must maintain an understanding of the technological innovations happening not only in the industry they are a part of, but any development that could potentially create a substitution for their product. Next, let's look at how information systems in particular can provide a competitive advantage. Organizations can respond to Porter's 5 competitive forces in a number of ways. For our purposes in this course, with a focus on information systems, we can distill this into a list of principles that describes techniques for gaining competitive advantage through products and services or via the development of business processes. The first set of principles all involve how we implement products. Number 1 is creating a new product or service. Once again, you don't want your business to stagnate. Once you get to the point where you have good sales and a large enough margin, you can start expanding. And one way to do that is by creating a new product line. Take 3D printed ducks again, for example. Maybe we could move to printing customized cats or other figures. Number 2 is enhancing existing products or services, and this provides another way of preventing stagnation. For example, a problem with the 3D printed ducks is that they are printed with hard filaments. And this might not be a problem for display purposes, but it's not ideal if we wanted an authentic rubber duck feel. or for it to have a little squeak to it when we squeeze it. A solution could be investing time and money into exploring printing ducts with flexible filaments, like TPU, and that would make them behave more like traditional rubber ducks and potentially be more appealing to consumers. The last principle involving product implementations is differentiating products or services. This allows us to create competitive advantage by exploiting Porter's differentiation strategies. So maybe there are rival 3D printing services popping up on Etsy that are starting to compete with us in the space. One solution to regain a competitive advantage might be to offer more customization options, or start even creating our own 3D models that others couldn't print. These would both help differentiate our product from competitors and hopefully attract customers as they see the value these changes add. Information systems can help us achieve these objectives and gain a competitive advantage. How, you might ask? Well, as we've discussed in past lectures, information systems provide us with the information we need to make good decisions. In this case, they might provide us with the information we need to decide on what new product lines we should explore based on customer feedback, or in what ways we can enhance our services based on recent sales figures. There's also a second set of principles based around business processes and system implementations. Number 4, the number 4 here continuing from the first set of principles, is lock in customers and buyers. Recall that lock-in is when a business makes it difficult or costly for customers to switch to rival products. For example, if we take a look at computer operating systems like Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and Unix, after your organization adopts one, there's a significant effort required to switch to a different product. This is called a switching cost, and it comes from things like the direct cost of the new product, indirect costs of replacing other software and hardware that's no longer compatible, costs in terms of the man-hours to install the new software and hardware, and possibly the biggest cost of all, which would be retraining your employees. Number 5 is lock-in suppliers. This is the same idea, but instead of your customers you're locking in your suppliers. For example, if you're the only company a supplier creates a raw product for, you have significant leverage over the supplier, as they would have a hard time replacing you. Or alternatively, it could simply be about making it easy to work with you over other businesses. Number 6 is creating barriers to market entry. This involves making it difficult or costly for new businesses to enter your space. This could be done through legal means like patents, or it could be through having a significant investment in manufacturing equipment or IT that would be hard for a rival to reproduce without significant cost. Number 7 is to establish alliances with other organizations. This could be with the goal of creating standards, promoting product awareness, increasing the market size for everyone, or reducing raw material costs. The last principle, number 8, is to reduce costs. This cost savings could then either be passed on to your customers, making your product more competitive. This would be sort of like Porter's cost focus or cost leadership strategies. Or the savings could instead be used to increase your margin and invested back into your business. One question you may be asking is, can this competitive advantage be maintained? Keep talking about how information systems can bring competitive advantage, but we also keep talking about the dangers of businesses stagnating. Well, in terms of only technology or IT, no, it can't. Competitors will eventually react to your advantage by replicating your technological innovations. Also, as a technological innovation becomes more pervasive, that is, everyone has it, it slowly stops becoming an advantage and starts simply becoming mandatory for business. Take, for example, having a social media presence or a business website. In the 90s, having a virtual storefront that customers could order from would have been a big competitive advantage. But in the 2020s, it's now simply expected by customers. But there's still some hope. While it is true that IT alone can't sustain a competitive advantage, information systems are a lot more than just IT. Recall that information systems also include people and procedures. These are the human components. Through good procedures and good employees, we can have a system of continuous improvement and innovation that will allow our business to maintain an advantage and be successful in the long term. Never forget that in business, it is the people or the human components that make the difference. So that's all I have for you in this lecture, and this brings us to the end of Chapter 3 in your textbook. If you have any questions about any of the topics we covered today, please don't hesitate to post on the OWL course forums or send me an email. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.